Hello, I think we're connected. Hope you can all hear me. We're going to start in about a minute. That's maybe a bit better. Okay. Okay, about 30 seconds to the top of the hour. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so today we're continuing on with the 10 perceptions in the Girimananda Sutta, and we're up to the third, which, if my count is right, which is the perception of Asubha. Asubha literally means the unlovely or the undesirable. And the example given in the text is the 32 parts of the body, or really the 31 parts of the body, which I'll read the list out in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. You see this list all over the place, and it's always a little bit different because of the translation. What is the perception of unattractiveness, Asubha? Here, a bhikkhu reviews this very body upward from on the sole of the feet and downward from the tip of the hairs, enclosed in skin and full of many kind of impurities. There are in this body hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrows, kidneys, heart, liver, pleura, spleen, lungs, intestines, mesentery, stomach, excrement, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, saliva, snot, fluid of the joints, urine. Thus he dwells contemplating unattractiveness in his body. This is called the perception of unattractiveness. If you're familiar with this list, and as it's often presented, may have noticed an omission. This is 31 parts, and the commentators added 32, so they added one. So if you see the Visuddhimagga version, it'll end with the last bodily part, which is brain. It's kind of a digression, but it's an interesting note that the ancient Indians seemed to have had no idea what the brain was for. In the Visuddhimagga, for each of the 32 parts, there's a description as to shape, color, and function, location, so on, details about the anatomical details about the part. And for brain, it's described as a kind of bone marrow that fills the skull of the head. And when you get sick with a cold or flu, it liquefies and drips out of your nose. So obviously they had no sense of the brain, what the brain did. And usually they associate thinking in the mind with the heart. There's a story in the Vinaya about a young fellow who was raised in very spoiled conditions, and his parents, as he came into adulthood, his parents wanted to find him a soft living, and they thought about different occupations, and they said, well, we don't want him to be a farmer. He'd have to work hard out of doors and get bitten by flies and mosquitoes and so on. And they went through various different occupations. And one of them, they said, well, he could be an accountant in the king's counting house. No, that wouldn't do, because he'd have to think too hard and his chest would hurt. Anyway, that's a digression. This meditation on the 32 parts of the body is a very traditional one. When a new monk is ordained as a novice, the first meditation he's given by tradition is the abbreviated version of this that only takes the first 5 bodily parts, which are the external ones: hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin. Hair of the body and hair of the head are different words in Pali, and also in Thai, incidentally. The general idea of the 32 parts of the body relates directly to this theme of the Girimananda Sutta, which is training the perception. And 32 parts of the body is often done as a counter to sensual desire. When we feel sensual desire towards another person's body, it arises because of a special perception. The mind focuses on what are certain signs and particulars, to use the phrasing of Siddhimaga. So obviously, if you're a male and you're looking at a beautiful woman, you're not focused on mucus and sweat and fat and so on. There are certain features that one focuses on which skews the perception. And with 32 parts of the body, we're trying to get not a revulsion towards the body. That's definitely not the intention, but a neutral, equanimous sense of the body, both our own and others, as a more realistic perception that includes a 3-dimensional perception that includes the whole totality of the body, and not just the external signs, but the internal organs and bones and blood and so forth. So this can be a very useful exercise if one is distracted in meditation by sensual desire and fantasies. Then one can take up 32 parts of the body and turn the perception in another direction. Because the sensuality comes, as I said, from a particular mode of perception. Now, this 32 parts of the body is given in the Girimananda Sutta as an example for perception of Asubha, but the topic is broader than that. And I think it's a very important one. One of the characteristics of an arahant is said that he can perceive the lovely in the unlovely and the unlovely in the lovely. These things are a product of perception. There's a colloquial saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Beauty is not intrinsic in the object. Attractiveness or subha is not inherent in the object, but is something that the mind finds pleasing, because of all manner of things: habit, conditioning, cultural influence, and so forth. And what one person finds beautiful and attractive, the other person finds ugly and discordant. In the Abhidhamma, pleasant and unpleasant feeling are only directly associated with 2 sense bases, the mind and touch. The other senses, sight, hearing, smell, and taste do not in themselves and of themselves find an object pleasing or unpleasing. It's the processing by the mind that classifies an object as pleasant or unpleasant, subha or asubha. I think this is illustrated by the phenomena of an acquired taste in food. There are certain foods that when you were young, you didn't like them. Usually young people, children, and even up to young adults, they're not really fond of sour and bitter flavors. But as you get older and your tastes mature, you begin to enjoy a wider range of flavors, and you acquire a liking for certain foods. So the taste itself is just a sensation. It's neutral. It's the mind sense that picks it up and perceives it as being pleasant or unpleasant. And this applies to all the other senses as well. And you can see people have different tastes in things like art and music. And the external object may be the same, but one person finds it pleasing and the other person finds it unpleasing. It's only the sense of touch that we experience directly pleasure and pain. Touching a hot stove is pain. Feeling a cool draft on a hot day is pleasant, and these are directly experienced by the body. So, having said that as a kind of a introduction, I want to talk about using perception as a understanding perception, let's say, as an important part of Dhamma. I'll tell you an anecdote from my early days. So when I was still a layman, and I was taking meditation instruction from my first teacher, Kema Ananda. And at one time, we were working together, cleaning up the yard, and the moving things away and raking it up and so on. And we took a break, and we're having a coffee break and looking out the window, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after coffee break. And I said, I think I'm going to, after break, I'm going to move that ugly old pile of poplar pieces. There was some old firewood that had been left, about 8 or 10 pieces that had been left for a few years, and it was getting all soft and moldy. It was no longer good for firewood. And so I said, I'll move those ugly old bits of wood. And Kema says, how can you call those poplar pieces ugly? The wood is beautiful in every stage of its cycle, from the standing tree to the cut pieces of wood, and then when they start to go rotten, look at all the colors and the mushroom fungus growth on the coming out. It's like a beautiful natural sculpture, and it turned my perception around. And then afterwards, we're working out in the field, and I'm doing something else, and Kema says to me, hey, I thought you were going to move those ugly old poplar pieces. And I found later, living with Kema and listening to him with other people, that this was one of his favorite teaching modes, was to switch people's perception around. If they found something pleasant and beautiful, he'd point out how it was ugly and unattractive, and vice versa, to let you see how your perception is fluid. Another incident in my personal life, much later, in my first period in Thailand, they have these insects in Thailand that are kind of big grasshoppery things that live in the trees. And every evening, just as the sun goes down, they start making a sound. It's a very high-pitched kind of a racket. They're calling to one another. First time I heard it, I didn't even think of it as organic. I thought somebody's car alarm had went off. It was such a strange, high-pitched, almost mechanical kind of sound. And I started over time, I got used to every evening there'd be a serenade of these cricket things. And I started to find it really irritating. Well, when are they going to shut up? Until one of the senior monks was talking about something else, and it got around to insect life, and he said that the Thai people, one of their names for those cricket-like creatures is the trumpet of the Dewas. And hearing that immediately turned my perception around. And after that, I found the sound to be beautiful. So I think that this is, these are just two incidences that in my own experience, but I think maybe you can look at your own life and how what is pleasant and what is unpleasant is a matter of judgment. And it can be useful to see that, if you're was like the 32 parts of the body is an exercise, is a deliberate attempt to take that which is perceived as lovely and see it as unlovely. And you can do the reverse. If you find yourself surrounded in what you perceive as ugly surroundings, you can try and find the beauty in it. But usually, most of the time, the biggest issue we have is perception of the lovely leading us into sensual desire. So that the emphasis here is on perception of the unlovely, of asubha, of unattractiveness, in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. And this is another way that we educate and train our perception. Sanya, understanding sanya is very, very important and useful for understanding reality. The aggregate of sanya is really how we create the world that we actually live in. We don't experience the world at first hand. We get signals through the sense bases, and these are picked up in the mind, and perception creates a simulation of the world that which is what we actually experience. And perception is not only fluid, it's also trainable. We can educate it. We can guide our perception in one way or another. And this can have a great benefit for our peace of mind and our happiness. So I'll stop my formal remarks there and take up questions from the chat. Let's see what we got here. Why is there a modeling industry if beauty is in the eye of the beholder? Yeah, that's a fair question. Well, we can see even with something like a female beauty that it's to some degree culturally determined. And there were periods in the past when a female form that we would now consider to be overweight or obese was considered the height of beauty. And at other times, like the 1920s, the ideal female form was very thin and svelte, in a boyish figure. This was, so there's some cultural determining factors. And there's also a longer term evolutionary factors that, we have a evolutionary, evolutionary programming to find certain signs in particular as attractive. Next question. Wondering about finding the smell of decaying body pleasant. Perhaps a meditator could train perception to find it pleasant. Suppose some like barbecue, but not quite the same. Maybe yakas, though. Yeah, well, certainly to a yaka, the smell of or to even to a maggot, the smell of a decaying body would be delightful. Um, Again, I think there's some biological programming for certain odors, the odor of decaying flesh and the odor of bodily waste, that because they're dangerous, contain pathogens, that we have a long-term biological programming, which is still conditioned, right? It's still conditioned, but it's more built in. Next one. Dear Ajahn, how does a Sambuddha being that can know instantly any unknown thing to him, that which he wants to know, does not know about the existence of an organ such as the brain and its function? Well, the idea that the Sambuddha was omniscient is commentarial gloss. There was a historical tendency after the Buddha's time to exaggerate the state of a Buddha until in some Mahayana schools he becomes basically a deity. I don't think the Buddha needed to know all kinds of scientific details. I don't think that was part of his necessary penetration into reality. He saw the laws of cause and effect and karma and samsara and the way out of that. And we don't. Also, I would also say that we don't. We don't know that the Buddha didn't know about the brain. He doesn't mention it one way or the other. This details about the heart being the seat of thought and the brain being just bone marrow. This is later. This comes in with the commentaries. The Buddha was silent on that question. I've read that engaging in primitive and simple pleasures can lead to an animal rebirth. Does that mean listening to Mozart will get me closer to becoming a Dewa in the next life? That's actually a sophisticated kind of question. I think that and I've used, talking about the different realms of samsara and the Dewa realms, I've used music as an example. I sometimes get myself in trouble because people have different tastes in music, but we can see if we look at the descriptions of the Dewa realms that all the Dewa realms up to, not including the Brahma worlds, but up to the six sensual heavens, they all have sensuality, but it becomes more and more refined, more and more subtle, more and more ethereal as you go through the six layers. And I think you can see something like that with music. And there are genres of music that depend mostly on a repetitive beat. This kind of appeals to a sort of animal passion. And then there are more and more subtle forms of music, like in the middle would be something like jazz, and as you say, Mozart would be up near the top. Maybe Bach would be even more subtle than Mozart. But it's still sensuality, but it would align the mind more with I think that kind of music would align the mind more with Dewa level consciousness than with animal level consciousness. Next one, Nagarjuna says the 5 agras disappear when you overcome ignorance because they were just an illusion in the first place, and overcoming illusion involves overcoming the delusion that the aggregates were real. Hence, why the cause of samsara is ignorance, and nirvana is in some other realm where Naraham goes to. Hence, the Buddha rejecting tetralemma. Do you think this logic holds up based on the suttas. I would, with a bit of a caveat, it depends what you really mean by an illusion. I kind of alluded to this talking about samsara and how we create a simulation of the world. But my understanding is that the Theravada position has always been that there is a real world out there. It isn't just all mental. There is a physical, but that it's kind of a moot point because we can never know it. Everything we know and experience is mediated through the mind. So it is an illusion in that sense, in that the formations and the various mental and physical aggregates that we actually touch and experience are generated in our own mind based on data coming in from the senses. But there have been other takes on this in Buddhist history. I think some of them approached a more idealist interpretation that only the mind is real. Okay. Next one. Are the beings mentioned in the canon, such as humans and animals, devas, pretas, brahmas, etc., particular to this world system? What I mean is there are other systems with the same realms and beings, such as humans, speaking English, Pali, etc., cats, brahmas, devas, elephants, exactly as mentioned in the canon? Or are they different beyond our comprehension? I don't think we can really know. I don't think there's a definitive answer. It seems to have been mostly assumed in the commentaries that the other world systems were very similar, not identical, but very similar to this one. And that they would have the same array of Deva worlds and even the same geography of 4 continents, and even down to such things as the Ganges River. Now, now this was, of course, speculation. We can't really know what it's like on other worlds. I would think it's most likely that there are spiritual parallels to all these levels, to animals and humans and so on, and other world systems, but that they are not physically identical to what we see here. I mean, you can see even on Earth on a much more limited scale, and where there's always been some interchange. You can see different arrays of animals and even different races of humans on different continents. What kind of action will lead one to be the intelligent in the next life? Well, you're doing it right now by listening to Dhamma and asking questions. It's said to be the way to encourage intelligence in the next life. If you were around 2,000 years ago, which of the ancient Buddhist schools would you have ordained in? Oh, that's a decent question. I might actually have been drawn to the Sarvastivadin. I find when I've looked at Sarvastivadin material that it seems pretty clear. Because there's no Sarvastivadins around today, so that's not an option. Let's agree that some people can never be considered model material. Yeah, probably. In the translation of DN16, you read earlier, the enlightened monks say, what's the point of all this after the Buddha's parinibbana? Okay, I'm not sure about if there's a question there. Okay, it's further down, he continues. Does it have the same meaning as what else is there to expect? I read an Ajahn Just translation of Digha Nikaya 16 that there's another subtle meaning, or is there another subtle meaning I'm failing to grasp? I think, yeah, that's what is the point of all this. It could mean what else is there to expect, but I think I would take it as also pointing to the actual futility of any conditioned action. The samsara is in the last analysis is futile. There's no, it's just going round and round. I know the Buddha was weary of his followers listening to engaging in music, and music can be intoxicant, but as a musician, I'm glad to know that music can be skillful. Again, I repeat something, I got into last week about art, or any kind of art like theater or music and so on. I think it's really the effect and the intention. Is it to elevate people and raise their level of consciousness, or is it just an appeal to delusion and gross passions? In the Animata meditation from Majjhima Nikaya 43, it says there are three conditions for the persistence of signless awareness release: lack of attention to all signs, attention to the signless property, and a prior active will. What is the meaning of signs here? Signs there are nimitta, which in its broadest meaning is any imagery in the mind, but it refers in meditation generally to a mind-created object used as a meditation object. But I think here it's the broader interpretation. It's not holding or attaching to any sense impression. Next, the teaching of non-self is so confusing to reason through. Why are we trying to end suffering if we do not actually exist? Why is there suffering if there's no self? Why does there have to be the question itself? It seems to be, as often is with talking about not self, there's an implicit assumption in there that of a self. Why does there have to be a self for suffering to exist? Suffering is real, but there's no self which experiences it. It's merely it's a sensation. The suffering is real, but there is no sufferer. Thinking is real, but there is no thinker, and so on. Okay, let's take a couple more maybe. It is said one of the attributes of Buddha is Lokavidu. Does it mean that NASA is wrong and the earth is flat with Mount Meru in the middle? No, it doesn't. I think if we have to assume there's any reality to Mount Meru, it would have to be in a kind of another dimension, another frequency. So in other words, both models could be true simultaneously, but in different dimensions. Nothing is illusory about losing a limb. No, it's a real bodily injury. It's real at the level of the body, but only if we on an ontological level, it's all emptiness. Part of the problem with these sort of thinking about this and giving examples like that is a mixing up of levels. There's a metaphysical level that sort of like ultimate truth, but there's also conventional truth, a Paramattha Dhamma, which is where bodily well-being does matter. It's not something to be ignored. Form is like a lump of foam, sensation like water bubble, perception like a mirage, formations like a plantain tree, and consciousness like a magic illusion. Could you explain what each means? Yeah, I'll begin. Yeah, that those are the five metaphors that the Buddha gives for the five aggregates, the khandha. And I'll begin with the fourth one because it's probably that I always found that obscure until I went to Thailand. A mental formation, so like a plantain tree trunk. That never made any sense to me. Well, what the heck is that talking about? Until I was in Thailand, and one day I saw some villagers cut down a plantain tree, and the trunk is hollow. It's not actually a tree. It's like some kind of a gigantic grass thing. The trunk is just made of a spiral of like huge grass blades winding around each other. So it looks from the outside solid. This is like a mental formation. It looks like something solid, but it's just fabricated and illusory, and it's hollow. Form is like a lump of foam. If you see water in a river, like we have a river here that roars pretty strong this time of year, and there's often froth and foam in places on the river. So it's a structure, just like the body or any form is a structure built up out of processes, and it has no real essential reality. Like the sea foam or the river foam will just dissolve and be carried away. And there's a way to think of like the body is as an ongoing process rather than a solid thing. Maybe even a more better example is like a whirlpool. If you look at a creek or a river, you'll often see a little whirlpool, like a spiral of water caused by the current. And that's a structure, that's a form with a definite shape. But the material that makes it up is constantly being refreshed. There's new water coming in and water going out. It's like the body. We're processing matter from the outer world constantly into this form, which we perceive as something solid and persistent. Feelings are weighed in as like a water bubble. Yeah, it's like you blow bubbles, soap bubbles. They can be colorful and they can get quite large, but they dissolve, they pop immediately. There's no solidity to them. It's like our feelings. Sometimes we can be overwhelmed by our feelings of pleasure and pain, and we think it's something really important and blow it up like a soap bubble, but it's nothing there. It just dissolves. Perception's like a mirage. This is actually very literally true. Like a mirage is a form of perception. I said we create the world from data from the senses, and perception creates a simulation of that. And that can be colored by all kinds of factors. If you're dying of thirst in the desert and you see heat haze in the distance, your desire for water might skew your perception so that you see an oasis. The last one is consciousness is like a magic illusion. A magician makes things appear and disappear and pulls rabbits out of the hat and so on. This is what consciousness does. It does a sort of magic trick all the time. Can one do Vipassana meditation on psychiatric meditation like antipsychotics or antidepressants? Can one see clearly? I don't want to give a definitive answer to that. I would think it depends on a case-by-case basis. Some people have chemical imbalances in their system, in their brain, that I think they need some kind of medication just to reach a median point. Other individuals maybe, if the condition is purely psychological, then the drugs may be a hindrance. But I don't know. This is too personal, and you'd have to talk to your therapist and to really try and figure it out. Do you think euthanasia is permissible in the case of a seriously deadly disease such as rabies, where you're going to die in a horrible way? No. In Buddhism, euthanasia, even for animals, is never permitted. The only exception given is, actually, there is one exception, is that an arahant who's already completed his work, he can voluntarily end his life if his life has become too much of a burden. But for everyone else, no. Euthanasia is never a wise choice. Is everything defined by the animal kingdom considered to be sentient, from sea sponges all the way to humans, or do organisms become sentient in the introduction of a brain and central nervous system? No, I think we have to define what's meant by sentient. In the Buddhist definition, all animal life has consciousness. Plant life does not. So, but having consciousness can be very primitive. So there's still some sense of internal mental life in even a one-celled animal, but it's very rudimentary. And obviously, the higher up you go in the animal kingdom, the more sophisticated thoughts and emotions become. Okay, I think we'll maybe call it there for today, and we'll see you again next week. We'll continue with this series. Okay, bye all.